Beyond Borders, Global versus GCC MedTech Perspectives. And the panel will be moderated by Malek Nasr, co-founder of HighLife. Maria Nyakern would be our first panelist, managing partner, Nyakern Nexus Investors, followed by Dr. Laurent Pacheco, chair, London Venture Capital Network. There will also join JJ Amell, founder and managing partner, Amell Law Firm, Steve Moore, founder and CEO, Welcome Health Ventures, and Sahir Ali, founder and general partner, Modi Ventures. Please help me to welcome on stage our panelists.
Thank you, Yulia. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I think we're going to start with an interesting conversation, probably your favorite panel today. So a lot of interesting topics, and we're starting with what are the perspectives for MedTech technologies in the world and also in the GCC. And maybe we can, oh, Maria, you need a microphone.
Thanks.
You have it? Okay, perfect. And so maybe we start with the first round of presentations. My name is Malek Nasr. I'm a co-founder of HighLife, which is a company that makes transcatheter mitral valves. So we're in the cardiovascular field. We're based in Paris, France, and in the USA in Irvine. And we can start with each member of the panel presenting himself. So Maria, maybe you can kickstart this conversation.
Thank you, Malek. Thank you, the organization, for inviting me to this very nice congress and event. So my name is Maria. I've spent 2 decades of my professional career in the medical device industry. I'm really passionate about the clinical development process, understanding regulations. My primary focus has been on the European market, but I founded a CRO about 7, 8 years ago. It was very successful. I was acquired by a larger player in the market. And after that, I went over to investing small starts, primarily focusing on small startups in the medical device space where I can contribute with my clinical and regulatory background, but at the same time support the innovation on a much more direct level. And when the AI as medical devices started about 5, 6, 7 years ago, of course, there was a huge regulatory gap in the industry of understanding the emerging technology and how we should shape it and regulate it. And part of what I want to talk about today is not so much how we regulate AI as a technology, perhaps how we need to regulate its creator, because I think it's an important shift of how we understand that. And beyond that, I am very glad to be here and support this region also with this European perspective of both regulations and compliance. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Hi, all. I'm very pleased to be here to meet you. I hope we can mingle in the day very soon. My name is Laurent Pacheco. I am the chairman of the London VC network and also an investor, VC investor with an American VC called Solas Bioventures. We've only invested in the US so far, but looking global. And that's also one of the reasons that brought me here, right? To explore, of course, the region is very interesting to us. I'm also an academic at King's College London, where I focus on health economics, although I was trained initially a medical doctor. So this is the perspective I'd like to bring today in the discussion, some of the economics models, looking to explore revenues for businesses. And again, looking forward to expanding our networking together. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurent. Thank you, MedTech World. And salam alaikum. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. My name is JJ Amell. I am from Houston, Texas. I am a business immigration and trademarks attorney. I am an advocate for business consideration, for considering business plans that have business immigration implications. I see a gap and a business need, and I'm here to be an advocate for that. My history with MedTech in general actually begins with probably my father, who was a cardiologist in Houston, Texas. Upon reflection, I was realizing that he opened the first outpatient cath lab in Houston, Texas. So maybe in some funny way, this is me continuing his legacy. I am fascinated with this world. I was also his in-house counsel for his practice, so I feel very comfortable. I wouldn't say by any means I'm an expert, but I feel very comfortable speaking with individuals in the MedTech industry. Hope to be an advocate, to continue to be an advocate for this field, and open to any conversations any of y'all may have regarding entering the U.S. market. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, JJ. Good morning, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Sabah al khair. My name's Steve Moore. I'm the CEO and founder of Welcome Health Ventures. I'm from the UK. I've spent the last decade or so living in the Middle East, the last 6 in Saudi Arabia. I've held various posts over that time, and I created this company last year out of anger and frustration that innovation in healthcare needs to be scaled quicker. I think it's unethical. I think it's borderline criminal that there are thousands of products and services that exist in the world today that are proven to improve human health and well-being that are simply not scaled up. Having spent the last few years in Saudi, my specialism is helping companies and solutions to understand the Saudi market, to understand the transformation. And I think one of the key barriers to overcoming this challenge of scaling innovation is human trust and human relationships. If we spend a little bit more time learning and understanding each other, we can create innovation highways around the world. And that's what I want to do. I want to help scale innovation. I see the GCC not just as a market within itself, but as a launch pad. And I invite every single one of you to come and talk to me today about Saudi specifically, the GCC more broadly, and we will do everything that we can to help as a community, as a tribe, as a room full of people who share the same values to make what you need to happen, happen.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sahir. I am from Houston, Texas as well, like JJ. I'm the founder of Modi Ventures. It's a venture capital fund that invests in this convergence of tech and bio and medicine. We'll talk more about that as we go. My background, I'll take a page out of Nubar Effie, and I call myself a parallel entrepreneur. I've been sort of at the intersection of what I call a quantitative fields, spent some time at Wall Street as a quant, then I fell into oncology and AI, which led to my PhD. But I've also had a couple of successful companies at that intersection. So what I see the next 10 years, there's a profound convergence, which we haven't seen before, at the intersection of technology, bio, and medicine. And I think in this sort of circle, we're going to start to engineer life that we haven't been able to do before, which has been the sort of holy grail. So happy to talk about that in detail later.
Thank you, Sahir. Thank you, everyone, for the introduction. Maybe we can start with a topic that is really a subject that's pretty widely spread today, which is artificial intelligence. So there's a lot of innovation in MedTech, and AI is one of the main innovations. Maria, you're in that field, so maybe you can tell the audience how AI can be, in which examples AI can be applied to medicine or to the MedTech industry, and maybe also tell us how the GCC countries can take a leadership role on the international scene with artificial intelligence.
Yes, thanks for the question, Malek. It requires, of course, if you want to go into depth of it, it requires much more time, but I want to emphasize on a couple of aspects. So I mentioned I come from clinical research, and one of the greatest flaws that we've had in clinical research is the bias of the data. So for decades, we have known that the clinical research and the data that we have generated across the globe is basically EU and US centric. It's focused on, and I think the medical doctors here in the audience know that it's focused on a white male that's 65 years old, and that data is supposed to represent the global population, which we know it's not accurate, and in fact it can be quite dangerous. So why do I want to mention this? It's specifically related now also to when we go in and develop AI systems and technologies and diagnostic tools and monitoring tools that is supposed to be able to be scaled at an unprecedented in an unprecedented way that we have seen before. So here it's really important to understand just, I think, 3 key concepts. So first, we have basically today 3 types of AI system modeling. It's the market first driven approach by the US. It's an innovation first market driven approach. You could compare that to perhaps the Chinese modeling, which is more a state governed, control driven approach. And then perhaps the EU centric approach, which is regulation first and patient centric, privacy-driven approach. All of these 3 approaches, of course, are favoring innovation. I'm not saying that one approach is stalling it, because one of the big debates is, unless the market can control AI development, does it mean we stall innovation? So I think that's a flawed understanding, that somehow we have to have, a completely free innovation without regulation, otherwise we won't see an advancement. I think it's a common myth. And secondly, I think if we understand that something as important as AI systems will be not created in isolation, but within the cultures and the context, the political biases, the philosophical biases where it's created, we understand that there cannot be one AI development that will be universally acceptable. Not that the way the world is currently created, because we do know that we have at least 5 globally big sections where culture, priorities, values, moral codes differ. So that is really important to understand, because sometimes we believe that we can just extrapolate what we're doing in one region and implement it in other regions. So I think here the GCC region comes in, and the Middle East in particular, the broader region, on emphasizing how important it is, absolutely critical, that we have other AI systems developed that perhaps doesn't represent so much individual autonomy, but perhaps more collective responsibility. There's a big change in understanding of that, because the way we can debate a lot about philosophical aspects on
Let's do that.
What does the West believe versus the East? We almost come into philosophical or religious thinking, but I think we have undergone tremendous technological transformations before. Technology as seen as a catalyst, but we have to understand that what we're facing now is our greatest opportunity, but also our greatest challenge, because we can't afford to make mistakes, and we have to make a decision on, do we want to control this? Do we want to control the creators? Or do we understand that unless we manage to discuss this in a broader set. I think Steve brought up a really important point. We have to get away from this centric bias on one region, one set of moral codes and values, and what this technology is needed for. So once we can have that conversation, we can start to speak about regulation.
So this region has a part to play, because
I definitely
eventually, AI, we shape AI, but AI also shapes us. So they have a place to play here and to have their own approach of artificial intelligence.
I just want to, and before I release you to the rest of the panelists, one really important thing is a lot of people are afraid of AI because we have a tendency, and when I say we, I speak for the part of the world where I come from. We have a tendency of having this anthropomorphic view of AI. It will become me. It is me, it will replace me, it will, control me, whatever. But we have to realize that not all cultures and contexts has this view on AI. I mean, look, for example, in Islam, they have an anachronistic view on what deities are. It's very unlikely that AI needs to look like me. It has to have a face and a body, and be under scrutiny of the same moral codes as a human being has to have. So I think this is it's a challenge and an opportunity that we look at this, because I personally hope we can get away from the fear that AI is a robot Terminator monster that will end us all.
And I think, AI, MedTech companies using AI or other technologies, they also, not only they need to be, I would say, aware and integrate the social model they are evolving in, but also they need to generate revenue while keeping all that ethical. And so this is a question for you, Laurent. When I would say companies emerging in new markets or entering new markets, what would your recommendations be around how they structure their revenue model, and what mistakes they should avoid, basically?
I guess the first thing is to actually explore this revenue model. We are discussing early stage today, so companies being in a fundraise stage as pre-seed, seed, maybe Series A. And oftentimes, of course, at that stage, it may not be generating revenue yet, right? So the business, the founding team are very focused on the science, the tech, maybe regulatory matters, more than revenue at this stage. But the thing is, when we investors discuss and assess investment opportunities, we oftentimes ask about the revenue model, and we find this question is not very deeply explored yet. And of course, not because it's very early and we are told, right? Well, I can't be more precise because the positioning is not very well defined. We're not exactly sure how this is going to be used because it's still being developed. Yes, but it is important to document that as much as possible, because for us investors, if we don't see who is going to be the payer for this MedTech solution, basically it raises a question on the market, as in the revenue overall, of course, right? So oftentimes we are clear there is a need which may be covered by a solution, so it adds value, right, to patients, the healthcare system, so the unmet need may be addressed. But it doesn't mean there will be a very clear and systematic revenue flow for that. And again, the payer, as in the profile of who's going to pay, is very important to understand. MedTech is very broad. I would say in the molecule field, therapeutics, which we also cover, it's a bit simpler, right? Either reimbursed or not, done. In our world, it could be patient can pay for their apps. It can be physician for their practice. And in this case, there can also be some budget from a hospital group or a regional healthcare system that may be happy to pay for a MedTech that will improve operations, for example. It can be, of course, broader than that with public coverage. And now more and more, to justify this public coverage, you have what we call a digital therapeutics. So this type of MedTech or med-connected therapeutics that, if well developed in a view that the regulator would be happy to assess a clinical trial-like development, eventually they will say, yes, as a healthcare system, we are happy to pay for that. That's great, because it opens huge budgets and huge market for your product. So when we hear that from a MedTech companies who's coming to us for investment, we of course are super happy, because it seems like, they are developing on a digital therapeutics path. This is just an example I'm taking, where we understand if the boxes are ticked, this will be green-lighted for public revenue. Now, on the contrary, when we discuss with MedTech teams who tell us, well, we're not so sure, ideally we will be able to demonstrate a benefit in terms of healthcare efficiency, healthcare management, from a productivity perspective, okay, fine, but again, as they said, this has to be demonstrated. And for your hospital group to be willing to pay this extra budget, right, this extra amount, they would find it makes sense if there is patient benefits, yes, and of course, if they are ideally able to offset the cost of procurement by some sort of cost savings. And the point of asking the question early, beyond just understanding the picture, is also to help us, develop the evidence early on, demonstrating that there is an increase in efficiency in managing patients or possibly cost savings. This takes time, and this has to be developed as a methodology, which is health economics, right? Alongside clinical trial. Typically, you run your trial from a clinical trial perspective, clinical mindset perspective, and you want to measure how many hours of nursing time do we need? Is the patient going to be managed and followed up in hospital or ambulatory care? Because the budgets and the cost of this is different. So you need to measure. It takes a lot of time. And back to our panel point, which is international, GCC and beyond, these patient management models differ. Some patients may be with one disease, one condition, treated in a hospital in Europe, whereas here, if the system is more developed for managing that patient, an ambulatory care would be absolutely appropriate for the same type of patient, same condition. Of course, the economics is very different. The business model and the revenue model will be different. We would expect and we encourage companies to explore that, of course, especially if they want to go global, and everybody wants.
And so Laurent, how healthcare providers are paid is notoriously complex in the USA and Europe, but like we know it's extremely complex and many intermediaries. And actually, that brings me to my next question about US market, to JJ. What would be your, I would say, main recommendations for a company entering the US market?
Thanks, Malek. Yes, in my conversations with innovators and CEOs in this industry, I noticed that there was a gap. People are very concerned about, FDA compliance, business plans, intellectual property such as patents. But I think what needs to also be considered in that whole scope is U.S. immigration. And why am I emphasizing this? U.S. immigration, working with USCIS, United States Citizenship and Immigration Service, the State Department, and various other departments, it can be an elongated process. So when you're starting to analyze the U.S. market and you want to enter the U.S. market, you have to ask questions like, okay, are we going to acquire another business? Are we going to set up new shops? Are we going to bring our specialized knowledge individuals to the United States? Is our CEO going to need access to the United States? And so there needs to be a game plan around this. So my suggestion, to answer your question quickly, Malek, is bring a U.S. immigration attorney on board as promptly as possible. Set up a game plan there, because again, it can be an elongated process, and we may start seeing some changes under the Trump administration with DOGE, which may accelerate processing, some of the processing, but that's yet to be seen. They haven't touched these various agencies yet. Thank you.
Thank you, JJ. And similarly, I'm actually interested in Steve's view on the access to GCC markets. And more specifically, do you think, Steve, that there are any misconceptions maybe about these markets today?
Yes, I think is the short answer. But I think perhaps misconceptions is not the right word to use. If people are familiar with the concept of sense making, this is literally the concept of how we make sense of the world around us. So what what your brains tell you about the GCC is based on what you've read, what you've watched, some terrible Hollywood movie with some bad Arabian baddies. You know, this is, we absorb it. We absorb it a lot. And until you spend time here in the region, you really don't understand it. And you need to spend time here. I think in terms of access, look, for me, the GCC, it's made up of several countries. I think the challenge here and the opportunity for us as a community is to come together and say, how better can we harmonize those market entry access points and removing the barriers of those. But for me, the GCC is an exciting place, which is a strange thing to say, I think, because the GCC only has about 60 million citizens. I mean, you know, there's got to be some US states with more than that, right? But see the GCC as a launch pad. And if you see the GCC as a launch pad, where you're launching to? Broader MENA? Deep into ASEAN, deep into Africa? These are not typically global north countries. I just looked at some statistics, and I wanted to bring my notepad up here because my ADHD lets me down sometimes. And I wanted to get these statistics spot on. GCC has 60 million citizens, but if you extend that to MENA, it's 570 million. So the role of GCC in a broader market is very significant. Take that and offset that against America of 330 million people. So the size of market is not actually the GCC itself. It's bring the tech here, prove it, scale it, and improve human lives and well-being. And I just want to add an extra point, because I actually disagree with what Maria said about moral codes. I think the world has a lot to learn from Islam and Islamic finance and the rules around investment and how it can all work. If you extend MENA and go to the top countries that host the most number of Muslim citizens, you have Indonesia, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Egypt, not far from here, Sudan. How many of you are looking at Sudan? One hand. Great. The world is a big place. There was some election in some country, I think, was it your country? Some guy got in, some president fella?
Yes, it was my country.
Yeah. We can ignore this guy. He's not important for some of these countries. Let's stick together. Let's create a new world where we collaborate and enter these countries.
Yeah, it's great, Steve, because you're really shifting our perspective. It's very efficient the way you're doing it. And yeah, this region could be seen as maybe a laboratory for many technologies starting here. One maybe final words for Sahir. Maybe a broader question, because we're talking about emerging technologies and startups and things coming up. When you're investing, can you give us, in a nutshell, the main criteria that you're looking at to determine if a company is going to be sustainable, if it's going to generate revenue? What are the main things that you look at?
And those things are there, but since we're out of time, I'll just leave you with a few things. I mentioned I invest in tech bio, so there's this sort of a bit of a shift in thesis, and every technology has 3 R's: read, write, and reprogram. I've seen that with the electrons. We built stacks from transistors to microchip to software, and then we start to proliferate that. And I think AI is in that sort of story. When you look at sort of the disease or the life sciences, we're perhaps starting to have that same convergence from read, write, and reprogram. So over the last 23 years since Human Genome Project, we have had this intersection of hardware, software, that allowed us to start to digitize the entire stack. So if you think about from DNA to RNA to protein to tissues, we have a full digital stack we may not have proliferated it from genomics to proteomics to transcriptomics. This is starting to allow us to characterize disease in an unprecedented way. The second part of the story is that we tend to focus on the top of the stack, which is human health. So we've had medical imaging and all of that. Even within that, we now can actually start to say, how do we characterize disease better? So last example I want to leave you with is if you look at aggressive disease such as cancer, and particularly say prostate, which are quite indolent. So typically a multi-parametric MRI gives you a three-dimensional view, almost like a top-level view of what may be happening with the tumor. Pathology, which is now digitized, can start to look at these tissue slides, which are quite digital, again, sequences of data. We can now start to do germline genomics testing on it. We can start to look at spatial biology of this. If you just looked at what I just described about one disease, you have 4 or 5 human skill sets in that, typically separate reports. So perhaps the biggest opportunity for AI is what I call it can become the interpreter of disease, and it can collapse all this multimodal information and allow clinicians to actually risk profile patients. And that is perhaps the unmet need today. So I'll just leave you with that, and that's the sort of space I kind of invest in.
Sahir, can I ask you a quick question? That's a fascinating concept, the interpretation of disease. Can you expand on that just a little bit more?
Yeah, so I'm actually borrowing this term from Siddhartha Mukherjee's book, where he said cancer is the emperor of all melodies. So I'm saying perhaps this is the interpreter of all melodies. So just if you have a minute, just the example that I just gave you in prostate cancer, and that could be breast or any other cancer workflow, you typically have a radiologist that determines if there is an extraordinary impression. They're looking at sort of a field of view and sort of signals that are quite noisy. Then there's an ultrasound-guided biopsy, or just in breast cancer. In that biopsy, you have a tissue slide, which is now digitized, so we can look it up on the monitor, but also an algorithm can work on that. We can also do genomics analysis of that tumor. If you look at just these 3 things, you have terabytes of data that just come out. So you have radiologist, pathologist, bioinformaticist, and then ultimately all of this just comes to an oncologist, and they got to determine, okay, well, what treatment and what dosage. And it's a trial and error for the most part, even today. So what the opportunity is that we can now find target biomarker fit, and that's a lot of these innovations are, and I think we have a real opportunity to actually go beyond what we call disease management, perhaps find cures, and this is where CRISPR and gene editing and these sort of intersection, which I call cellular reprogramming. Yeah.
Thank you, Sahir. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for listening. We'll leave it for the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you.